Hey guys, this is SplunkTalk. I'm Hal Rotenberg. That's Birch. We're back, but we look different. I'm not Michael Wild. That's not Hal Rotenberg on the other side of the screen. So this is something new and different, but it's still SplunkTalk. So I figured, Birch, if you're okay with this plan, that maybe we would introduce each other a little bit and interview each other a little bit and just see where the discussion went. Is that cool?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm giggling at the. I want to start. The only thing I want is to actually start with a little energy. Wait, you muted yourself.
No, I didn't.
Oh, there you are. I was over talking.
Yeah.
Welcome to SplunkTalk.
So, how you feeling, Birch? I mean, it's Friday. We've been talking about this for a while.
We've been talking about this for so many Fridays. But this is happening now.
This is dipping the toe in the water because we're not live streaming, because that's like next level. We'll get there.
These are the baby steps.
Yeah.
I have to earn my way to live stream.
Yes. You it's like a driver's license. You got to get the sticker on your thing, and after so many hours, they'll let you live stream.
You're my authorized companion.
Yeah. So you've got training wheels on, and I will shepherd you through the process, and it's all good. No, I am excited and happy because I used to podcast a lot. Like I was doing a weekly show for a while, and that it kind of fell off just due to my career was going in different directions. So my PowerShell podcast just wasn't front and center anymore. And then I started doing SplunkTalk with Michael Wild back when he was around.
What year?
I don't know, 20 something, 2017 maybe.
I'll accept it.
Yeah, 2016, 2017, something. But SplunkTalk as a project had begun long before, because Michael Wild, being the mega boss man that he was, he had been at Splunk a long time, and he built up something called SplunkTalk and had a lot of fun with it. And some of our predecessors, and my brain's filling me now as far as the other participants in that adventure before us. But the last iteration was myself, Michael Wild, and then Clint Sharp started joining us because he was pretty awesome. We had a lot of fun as a trio. But it was hard to get three of us together in the same room. And then they like little birds, they just flew off and did their own thing. And that left me holding the bag, for which I felt very guilty. And then a customer of mine and a friend who here in town in Atlanta, Jason Spears. Hey, Jason. Several people.
Hi, Jason.
Several people had said, "Hey, when's SplunkTalk coming back?" So this is not a new conversation. People asked for new episodes, which is always awesome to hear that.
I like the idea that they always prefaced it with "when is it coming back," not "if" or "is."
Yeah, and podcasts are often this way in the sense that they don't end. There's no beginning and end, but there's a term in the industry, if you will. It's pod fade. They do fade away sometimes. So
I attribute it to Picasso, but there's this quote I love that's like, "Art is never finished; it's only abandoned."
Yeah.
Apropos.
I can identify with that. That makes sense. But I would like to.
But abandoned it is not.
No, yeah, exactly. We're coming back here. We wanted to start out with I mean, some podcasts have gone into like seasons. Like they'll label so maybe this is like season 3 or whatever. Episode 1, season 3. It doesn't matter. But anyway, I'm here. You're there. People need to learn more about what you're about.
Well, and it's been a few years, so I'm sure there's people that want to learn more about you too.
So maybe we should just go back and forth. Who goes first? We didn't talk about this ahead of time.
I'll be the chicken. You be the egg. The obvious one goes first.
You have Alexa or Google Assistant nearby? Hold on. I know what I could do. Okay, hold on. This will just take a moment. Okay, Google. Flip a coin. Guess you could have asked Siri as well. Head or tails?
Oh, I was really hoping you'd forget to ask. I'll go tails.
Okay. It landed on heads. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh, okay. So you go first.
I guess I go first. Does that mean that I'm interviewing or interviewer? Or it means I get
Heads or tails?
it means I get to pick, I guess. Okay. Why don't I interview for you first?
Okay, unless you want to flip a coin about that.
No, I think it's excited enough that we should probably just, move forward with a plan there. So, Birch, is that your real name? Birch Simon? You know you have two last names. So
I
you've got to deal with this a lot.
I just go by Birch. I have a last name that is too commonly a first name. And because of the confusion that often happens, I save people the embarrassment of calling me the wrong thing by just chopping off that last name whenever I can.
Yeah.
So I go by Birch.
But birth certificate wise, Birch is on it in the first position.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, but that will be a secret we have
Really?
to earn our way into over the seasons.
Okay. Then maybe a few. Okay, all right. We'll get there. We'll get there.
You got to get a few podcasts in me so I loosen up.
All right. So, Birch Simon, Simon Birch Simon, just Birch. And actually, in the company directory, your last name is not in there, which goes to what we were trying to accomplish there.
Interesting factoid. It used to be the Splunk logo for my last name.
Yeah.
And I had that for like maybe over a year. And then finally someone from HR came to me and they basically said, so it turns out the use of a special character breaks our systems. And rather than make the investment to get a developer to go and allow for characters that shouldn't be in a last name anyway, like a greater than sign, could you just change it to some alpha characters? And so I did. But a Splunker, Nina, had came up with the idea of why not use TM, like trademark. So my last name has been showing up as Splunk, as Birch TM.
Nice. I was wondering about that because I still had Birch greater than in my address book. And I just went to Outlook and clicked the update button, and now I see the TM. So that's kind of awesome that the conversation was not, an automated notification from the HR system that your name has been changed to whatever your legal name is. That's awesome that instead it was a conversation from HR, that was actually, kind of flexible about it. So that's cool.
Yeah, they actually paraphrased, but they went so far as they were like, we really admire that you're being splunky and living a corporate value of having fun, but have fun with a name that doesn't require us to go and change the code.
Yeah, my name is semicolon drop tables.
Yeah, I had a lot of like my expense report was showing up as Birch ampersand GT semicolon.
Okay. Yep. I can see that. All right, so let's get into a little more about you. So
Sure.
How long?
I've been with Splunk since I think 2014, end of 2014.
Okay.
I was a customer before that, though.
Okay. So how long had you been using Splunk before you joined us?
Basically, the first time I had Splunk come to my office was like the week after the IPO in 2012.
Yeah, so that would have been February or March of 2012. Well, that's when I started. I started in February of 2012, right before the IPO.
Ah, okay. Yeah, so I actually
go ahead.
No, we had actually looked at Splunk like a year or two before that, but it was a very different product pre 4.3.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't appropriate for our needs. But when I looked at it, it wasn't actually for logging. Mm-hmm. I looked at Splunk as an audit tool to be able to look at our WebSphere configuration, which was all in XML, mm-hmm. and be able to use it to get essentially a read-only look at a very large infrastructure, and use the name value pairs inherent in that markup language to understand where we had deviations and so forth. Because, in a lot of troubleshooting, you do a lot of, well, why does it work here and not here? What's different?
Yep.
So
configuration,
that was the initial.
Just understanding if anything changed, you do like an occasional load of the XML files. And then
I was using the file monitor.
Okay.
And every time the file changed, we were playing with the CRC salt setting
index
on it.
Thing. Otherwise, that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah. Which was fine because it wasn't that much data anyway.
Okay. But you'd ingested it as one document, the one event, one document is one event, or did you break it up?
I don't even remember anymore.
Listening has ever messed with ingesting XML files because the structure is irregular. It's hard to figure out how to make multiple events out of an XML file because the schema could be different from file to file.
Right. The pattern is by definition inconsistent, even so far as the use of attributes versus child objects. And so,
and sometimes they can
I remember struggling with that.
Yeah. And sometimes they can get really large. And if you've got like a megabyte XML as ingested as one event, that's hard for Splunk to parse. And it's also hard for the browser because we push a lot of that stuff to the browser. It's hard for the browser to act. You're going to be allocating RAM to do the field extraction, some of the field decoration, I guess is a better way to put that, because it's already been extracted.
Yeah, actually, I remember something. I forget exactly how I did the breaking because, actually, hit the pause. We're making an implication or an assumption here that we haven't uncovered, which is that XML with a time series could be an easy to parse format because you could say, oh, here's a timestamp, here's a payload, here's an event, whatever. Oh, here's another one. And it's essentially a log, but it's just written in XML, which is fine.
Sometimes it is. But not.
And this was one of those times it was not. And so those definitely were big files. I vaguely recall there might have been something where the way we used the CRC salt, it was only re-indexing the portion that was changed.
Okay.
I don't remember how we did that.
But let's, and I don't want to go too much further in that. I wanted people to hear that you could go there. And so that they know, a little bit about your brain. So what were you doing before Splunk? Not like your entire career necessarily, but what are some interesting things about you before you joined Splunk?
So my first job out of college was a rotational program. And the reason that is interesting is because it's uncommon to find an opportunity like that where I got to be a database administrator, a quality assurance analyst, a business systems analyst, a programmer, and an infrastructure engineer within a year and a half.
Oh, wow.
And and so once I started my career, sorry?
That was part of the gig?
Yeah. Yeah. And so coming out of that, it was incredible, not only knowing the people in all those different groups, but being able to understand and appreciate their perspective. And so I'd work with my peers, and when we came up with processes or we'd work with different teams and things were frustrating, you maybe didn't understand why someone was coming from a certain spot, I could. And that segued really nicely as I moved into getting more involved with Splunk, and I became a full-time Splunk administrator after being, after that rotation, I was an infrastructure engineer for like 7 years. Started playing with Splunk, became a Splunk admin at another company. And regardless of the fact that I was working with people of different technical backgrounds at the new company, I was able to carry that learning. And understand when they came to me with a new use case, I could help them translate. Oh, okay, you're doing this. This is your lifestyle. I've been there.
Yeah. So what you're saying, though, is one of those things that probably, I don't know how many people realize how important that is, because you can learn the technology. I mean, as long as you're comfortable with change and you pick up new concepts and but it's the soft skills and the talking with the people and working with the business stakeholders and all that stuff. That's probably harder to learn. You have to do it, and it's not comfortable for some people that are in our line of work. So you got to make yourself do it, or you got to put yourself in that position. I don't know about you, but like I consider myself to be a bit of a oh shit, I'm missing the word. I'm having one of those moments where like I know exactly what the word is that I want, but the one where you're the opposite of
Unicorn.
No, not I'm not outgoing. What is that?
Introvert, extrovert.
Introvert. I consider myself an introvert. Not when I'm speaking, on camera, like in a setting like this, and I'm okay with. I actually quite comfortable with public speaking. But like otherwise, yeah, I would rather not be highly social with a lot of people all the time and have. So it's this weird blend. And so somebody that's has a nature as an introvert, you got to put yourself out there and not be that introverted engineer, because you'll limit yourself.
And actually, you could. That's like the human factor side. There's even almost a selfish side, because if you're someone who's just so infatuated with what you do for work and the technology, why would you choose to do something else? Why would you choose to go talk to people and have to translate their use cases and help them understand these things? That's not the fun part. The fun part is the getting into the gear.
Mm-hmm.
So you see both sides of it.
I have definitely been in both places where, to me, the fun thing was reading the specs of a particular protocol, and I'm like, looking at SNMP, at the, what at what bit are they storing the object ID, and Yeah, that was the fun thing to me to do, at that time.
Yeah.
I've been in that also, but now I'm in a customer facing role and I'm having a lot of fun there too. So
yeah.
let's move forward now. So I mean, you definitely sat in the seat as far as operations and fixing the broken things and building new things. Did you have any particular outside of Splunk specialties or things that you gravitated towards?
Oh, you know it. So I actually got. I've always loved comedy, and so when I was in college, I got really into improvisational comedy, and it was this. I had tried scripted stuff, and it was too much work. It's like a lot of work and rehearsal.
Like high school and other things.
Yeah.
Did you were you in drama class or anything like that, or?
Okay. Yeah, in fact, I was the vice president of our theater club in high school, and I always giggle because I rarely performed in the plays because I was like, yeah, scripted stuff's not for me, but I love doing this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it was improv that really hooked me. The ability to not have to prepare and just go and do and be and live in your mistakes.
Yeah. That's why I podcast, man. You think we have a script here?
Yeah. So I did that. I then, after college, I was actually doing that professionally. So I was performing with theaters in the Boston area and did that for over a decade. And it was really incredible being able to use what I learned there and carry it in with my love of Splunk to be able to do things like present at conf and talk with customers and be able to think on my feet when I'm talking with customers and so forth. So that was a lot of fun, and that was part of how I was so drawn to when you had told me SplunkTalk was starting up again.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's definitely elements of creativity to this type of engagement, and I think it's kind of a free thing, right? It's not something constrained by a format. You don't have to deliver the script, and that's and people in marketing. I mean, bless them, they have a hard job and they have to scale and they have to build this structure, and it's rigid and it's like we're going to do create this collateral and it's going to make this format, and that stuff's super important. But man, my brain does not work that way. So that's not the type of contribution that I can do. That would be like scripted, drama would be for you.
Yeah. Well, speaking of what I do, what works for me and what works for you, should we?
Now.
Sorry.
I could ask you what you do now, if that's what you were trying to.
Oh,
horrible
I was
segue.
actually going to flip the script. So why don't I say what I do now, and then we'll flip it so we can learn about you as well.
That works for me.
I was a sales engineer with Splunk for about 2 years, being able to work with customers. And one thing that I was really drawn to was best practices and being able to tell customers and help customers learn from customers what works in reality, in practicality. And this opportunity came up of this best practices team that was being created. And I got connected with Devani, who was setting it up, and was able to become a best practices engineer. And actually, as of August, I now am the manager of our product best practices team. So we get to focus on creating content that helps accelerate or maximize our customers' investment in Splunk.
So why does that mean you therefore have to be a specialist in all of those best practices?
Professionally, no, but personally, I want to.
So, I mean, what do you do? What's that process like with, I mean, let's say that new version of Splunk comes out, okay, and there's a new feature that it's possible that it hasn't been used a whole lot yet. And I mean, how do you build those best practices at that stage?
Yeah,
Pick a feature. I mean, but there's a Smart Store, I guess would be a recent one.
yeah. So it's a challenge, and so having a team like this that's dedicated to it allows us to create systemic solutions, like being able to capture some of the best practices from the product creators who may have been so involved and intimately informed of what works and what doesn't with the usage of it. How can we get that from them? So right off the bat at a release, we can have that material available for everyone. Beyond that, it's an ongoing thing. How can we play with it or learn from our professional services or our sales engineers or people that are playing with it?
Or probably
What do
support.
they know that they can share? Sorry?
I said, or probably support as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's always learning.
Is there a specific example you can think of that stands out as far as a best practice that was just really helpful or surprising or unique?
I can think of a fun one that has caused me a lot of problems,
Alrighty.
which is that I once gave a sorry?
Will you share it with us?
I would love to. Um, at a conf talk, I misexplained a practice
Okay.
of what I intended to say was that if someone was intending to become an index or clustered environment, they could, until they have the other nodes set up, the other peers set up, they could run as a cluster with a replication factor of 1 and a search factor of 1. And it's essentially you have cluster configuration, but you haven't started any replication. And so you don't have any additional retention requirements and so forth, but it allows the bucket structure to start having the right naming so that when you do turn on clustering, you get that much more retroactive replication.
Okay. Can you not do that?
Unfortunately, the way I explained it was more simplistic. And so I accidentally led people into thinking that regardless of their intentions, they should be running a cluster of 1. And that's not true because you introduced significant more complexity in administration that was causing people to shoot themselves in the foot. So I was getting feedback from people. They said, hey, they heard in this talk that you gave that they should be running a cluster of 1. And I was like, oh, golly, the word choice I used, I didn't even recognize how much I oversimplified that.
Because when I joined Splunk around, I think it was version 4, but version 5 shipped not long after, clustering was new. That was new, and not a lot of customers were the uptake of it. It took a little while, and even once people trusted it, it was still like, okay, great, that's going to be more work than I have to do. But I think we hit a point, and I don't know when that happened, but relatively recently, where it was like, okay, you know what? There's actually benefits to turning clustering on, using a cluster master to manage the configuration state of all of the slaves. And I think that's probably where you're kind of coming from, that, there are other benefits. If you're not prepared for the extra, administration, it's a drawback. But
yeah, absolutely. If you have no intention on having that type of high availability, then adding in the complexity of just having one more thing, a cluster master, and learning that new configuration is probably not worth it. But that was lost in what I was communicating. It came off more like, just do it no matter what. And then people were like, this is hard to manage because I don't need it. I'm not getting a value from it.
But you have spoke at Conf a couple times. How many did you deliver last year?
Last year,
or was it the year before that you did?
The year before I did 11.
11. That's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Last year, we had a tight space in Disney.
Yeah.
I don't remember how many, but 2 years ago, I had some duplicate. I had 5 talks, and some of them were obviously done more than once.
Yeah.
So it came out to 11 shows.
Gotcha. Nice.
Yeah.
But no, we're back in Vegas this year, so hopefully the budget for the the number of sessions will be up higher. Because I mean, there's 1,000 submissions no matter what happens, but we can't fit them all in the show.
And that's the real shame. I mean, as much as I like to joke that being in a bigger venue affords me more opportunities to have me time in front of everyone talking, but the reality is that it's kind of heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking to see so many great talk ideas submitted and not accepted because we just don't have a lot of space.
Yeah. And in each of those rooms, it has a hard cost, and then there's got the decision. Okay, which of these is going to be most useful to the most people, and that's a hard decision to make.
Yeah.
All right. That's good.
So,
I think I understand a little more about you. Thank you for participating.
Can you tell us about you?
If I
specifically. So we got your name. Is Hal short for anything?
It is.
Or do we have to get a few more Splunk talks in you?
Per se. I don't hate my first name, but I don't use it. Like, nobody uses it. Nobody calls me Harold. That's just not a thing that anybody ever does. Harold Marvin Rotenberg Jr. is the full.
Oh, Marvin. Yeah. And you're a junior.
Yeah, I'm a junior. My grandpa was Marvin Rotenberg. Just that way. He didn't have the middle name. It was just the Marvin Rotenberg. Yeah.
So what's your background? I mean, I know that you have the PowerShell podcast as well. I'm really curious how you got so much PowerShell skills in your pre-Splunk career.
Sure. So the PowerScripting podcast was kind of the beginning of the peak of that part of my career. But that chapter, so before Splunk, I was in IT operations roles for about 15 years. I worked for HP, IBM, and Home Depot. And those, I was, I think I was at IBM at the time. I know I was at IBM at the time. And this was a neat group. I was in ISS, so Internet Security Systems. They're now a division of IBM, but they had just been acquired. And I joined them working in the in R&D in the lab. So I was on the team that ran the lab, and the lab was where. So they made IDS. They still make them, IDS and IPS products, and intrusion detection and prevention, for those not familiar with those acronyms. And whenever the developers or QA needed to test something, they had to test it against a vulnerable and a non-vulnerable state to know if their signature or if their remediation detected or fixed that thing. So that means that we had to have a Cisco switch with this version of iOS on it and that version of iOS on it. We had to have Microsoft Word.
iOS or OS2?
Actually, we had everything. I swear to you, we had everything. We did have OS2 in the lab long beyond after which we had all this old stuff because our customers at the time also had some of
Had
this
it.
old stuff. And the old stuff is where, like, if a hacker's going to use any possible endpoint to exploit that they can. So yeah,
If it's a vulnerability, it's a door.
exactly. So the old stuff that's at end of life, though, that's like the hacker's dream, right? Because it's not going to get a patch. So yeah, we would have, and we had OS2 boxes. We had physical stuff. We had a lot of VMs, and the job was to run this and manage it and try and automate it as much as possible. Because literally, the act of QA doing a full test of everything would break half the lab, because that's what they were doing. Was they would test live virus payloads, for example,
Wow.
and there was, all these worms, and
And back then, virus payloads were like the size of a refrigerator, right?
yeah, physically. But no, like, if you're testing something that is a denial of service, or a remote command execution type of thing, we're going to cause that thing to fall over or break. So what it meant was that this was a super high maintenance type of lab environment. It was production for them. It was a lab in the sense that it's not, quote unquote production in the IT sense, but it was production because they can't ship unless the lab is up and running. But every time they run a test suite, half the lab falls down.
So it's actually really funny you say that it's production for them. Terry Martin, who we both know, we both used to work with. He once blew my mind because I kept trying to explain that concept of, well, it's production for them. And he once said, off the cuff, he goes, if someone depends on it for their job, then it's production. And I loved it so much because it finally gave me a way to explain the world of Splunk, where you are bringing in this machine data, be it production, disaster recovery, QA, integration, dev, whatever. All of those environments, you want to be able to compare them with each other. And so you see a lot of customers where they start going down this path of having one Splunk environment for QA, one for production, and all this segregation, because that's their instinct. And they don't recognize that truism of, well, it's all production.
Right.
Having a lab for Splunk is a different concept than having people who depend on this information for their jobs be able to do their jobs.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting.
But getting back to the whole PowerShell thing, was a lot of the lab was Windows environments. Patch Tuesday, for example. Every month we had to recreate the vulnerable and non-vulnerable states of all these different Microsoft software OS, and as well as Office and this and that. So those
Patch Tuesday being the first Tuesday of the every month when Microsoft officially releases things, and they did that because they didn't want to randomly release vulnerabilities that left people unaware that they should be patching, right? So they had a regular cadence.
Right. It was a part of Microsoft's. They had an image problem of producing Swiss cheese type of software that was vulnerable, very vulnerable to. So they had to really reorganize all of their engineering around this, actually, because they had to produce they were used to doing releases once every few years, 3 to 5 years in some cases, and now they had to release something every month. So this was actually a big part of them turning themselves around and trying to. And then they had a lot more of that more recently with, you think about cloud and mobile, but so they had to get into a new rhythm. So which was a thing for them to do. They would notify us and other vendors, security vendors, roughly a week ahead of time, so we would know what's coming. Sometimes we would get a KB article. Sometimes we would get the bits, like the actual patch. Sometimes we would just get instructions on if this registry value is set this way, it's vulnerable. If it's set that way, it's not vulnerable. Or if version 123.31 of this DLL is in this path, it's vulnerable. If it's a greater version, it's not vulnerable. So sometimes we just had to fake it based on this really minimal information we had. Kind of interesting. And then a week later, we would get the patches like everybody else does, and they would be different. Sometimes they would change between that week. So
from what they said they were going to give you and what
going to be releasing, because it's just, it happens, and sometimes they would slip.
then they reserve that right.
Yeah. So sometimes they would slip. So I would know that a vulnerability is coming, and I would be like, it didn't show up. Where is it? So I might be, like, hey, hey, honey, my wife, I need to be on your computer for a second because I got to disable this service because I know that it's vulnerable. But a patch
Yeah.
didn't arrive, and I'm like, I gotta close the front door over here. But I got into PowerShell because it was in beta at the time, and it was the way to automate things on Windows. You did have VBScript, you did have Batch, but Batch was very limited, and VBScript was just not great. It was just never a great language. And it was, you could do some stuff. It had some extensibility. You had your VBScript, this.
But it was really the visual part was just the icing or the lipstick on what was basic, right? So it had passed its point of effectiveness as a language by then.
Yeah. So I got involved in this piece of beta software, saw that it was exactly what I needed because of the goals that Microsoft had at the time. I started to heavily get involved in using it to automate my lab. We had a VMware lab, and as far as the virtualization, the hypervisor, and I had a lot of VMs that I had to reprovision. So I started trying to figure out how to automate that. And I ended up getting into it. And then VMware was an early contributor to the PowerShell community. So they produced an integration. They were called a snap-ins at the time. They produced a snap-in. They were one of the very first third parties to do this with Microsoft. They made a snap-in, and it was in beta. And I was looking at it, this is a piece of crap, and this is really so bad. And like we need to do something better. And I had this group network of friends I was starting to work with at the time, Microsoft MVPs, who were basically, anybody in the Microsoft world, they know what an MVP is. But for those who don't, it's like, these are your ambassadors. These are your loudspeakers, and they're very vocal and they're very involved in the community, and they like to do user groups. Usenet was still a thing back then at IRC, and just community.
Is our equivalent the Splunk Trust?
Exactly. So I started hanging out with those guys, and then I got asked. It's like, hey, Hal, you're getting into this. I was going to write this book, but I can't do it. Why don't you write this book? Which was like, what do you mean write a book? Like, I did not complete college. I flunked out of college twice. I did not ever do a big project in school beyond a few pages of an essay kind of thing. And I was like, what do you mean write a book? But I did it. It took me a year, and it was like the hardest thing I ever did, but I did it. And it was managing VMware infrastructure with Windows PowerShell TFM. It's the book. And it's that kind of changed my career drastically, because
TFM, like RTFM.
And read the fine manual.
Okay, so yes.
Yeah. I would show it on camera, but it is currently being used as one of my monitor stands. So it's up my workspace if I were to show you the book right now. But that's okay. But I wrote this book, and after you write a book, like a technical, manual type of book, stuff starts coming your way, like speaking gigs, and people invite you to user groups, and I spoke at Microsoft Tech Ed before they had their Ignite conference. I spoke at VMworld. I mean, that was, huge shows. So that was a lot of fun. So I flew around, speaking, and I'd written this book, and I did some other kind of training stuff related to that, and then it was all of a sudden, that was like one of the best things I did for my career, because now I could kind of pick a path instead of just being in the role that I had been in, the operations role, which I was enjoying it, but it was, in retrospect, it was a little bit limiting. So I left IBM at some point during this. I was awarded Microsoft MVP, which I did that for 7 or 10 years or something like that. So it was a good run working directly with the people that made the product. So I had access to the inventor of PowerShell, the engineers, and that Microsoft did a great job in that program of building that trust, because they knew that people like me who are like just uber nerds that are super hyper interested and focused on this one little niche would give them great feedback. And when they did good, they would amplify that. And when they did bad, well, they would, they would hear about it.
Yeah.
So that was a really good part of my background was being a part of that technical community and kind of building that up, in which I kind of carried that forward when I joined Splunk and helped with the Splunk Trust program. Which those are.
Oh, but before you jump to Splunk, tell us about your first date with Splunk.
So after I left IBM, I went to Home Depot, and they were evaluating it. I worked on the tools team that was, they would have gone on to buy Splunk. It was interesting to them, and we were evaluating it. But I never touched Splunk. I left there, went to another job for a little bit, and then a buddy of mine, the same guy who actually gave me the book deal, who dodged on the book deal, he said, "Hey, I got this cool job. I think you would like it. You want to come build some stuff for me at Splunk? I'm building a team." And I had no interviews. I was directly placed into the job with no interviews, which is crazy. And especially now at Splunk, I don't know if you like it. You got to have more than a few. You have to have like 11 interviews, like it. But
yeah, it's a long process.
The only reason that worked though was because I worked for Will Hayes, who was like employee number 11 or something, and he just was kind of this cowboy that could do wherever he wanted at the time. So it was like, oh sure, well whatever, just build your team. We don't care. But anyway, so a few years I worked in business development organization as a solution architect, and I built integrations. I would work with partners directly, like NetApp. So I built the NetApp app, the first version of the NetApp app. I did a lot of huddling with Cisco UCS. So the Cisco UCS server platform, I built the UCS app. And I would build these little projects to see if, like, it was us and the partner seeing if there would be interest in a thing.
Almost like a proof of concept.
Sometimes there wasn't. Yeah, it was like a proof of concept. Hey, Splunk apps, like we were building an ecosystem because partners, some partners would of their own would build a Splunk integration because they needed it, because their customer kind of demanded it. But a lot of times it wasn't so clear. So we're trying to put that story out there to see if it was interesting to people. Hey, what would happen if we had, the chassis temperature of this UCS chassis, as a metric inside of Splunk? Would that be interesting? So I would build an app, and then I would go to shows and talk about it and stuff like that. So that was cool. I did that for a few years. And then I was a developer evangelist for a year. I worked for
I remember that.
At the time, Stephen Sorkin. That was a pretty cool gig. I was always, a couple of my jobs previous to Splunk were working in R&D labs with developers, and I didn't realize it at the time, but this later was a DevOps thing. So the concept of DevOps, of bridging between IT and developers, like that, later to me, I realized, oh, hey, this is a movement, and I should be interested in this. And so I started.
Yeah, because around that time, the tide of DevOps was.
Yeah.
It didn't have a name yet.
Yeah. So, and this was around the time that I, let's say, I think the team I was on, the developer evangelism team, it unfortunately just kind of came to an end at the time, and it was disbanded. And I was looking around, and I was like, oh, hey, these guys are doing something kind of cool over here in the IT markets group at Splunk. And I was hired on as a DevOps practitioner. So that was part of my title, was to help explain to everybody else, both inside the company and out, what DevOps was about, why it was important, what it had to do with machine data, like why should we care about this thing? And that was neat. So I did that for a couple years, and that was probably something where, like, I flew around and talked, at conferences about DevOps, started to build some of these different integrations, and we didn't do a lot on the product side. It was just we weren't there yet as far as the Splunk product itself. So it was a lot of talking about things you could do, rather than, like, 'cause there's not a DevOps product. I mean, that's how that works. I could go on at length about that, but I'll just leave it for the moment. But we could pick that apart later.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I see us doing that.
but I did that for a couple of years, and then I needed a change, so I came to the sales engineering organization, and I'm an SE now in the Southeast United States. And now it's directly customer facing, so it's the front lines. Whereas before I was in kind of the back. I was in headquarters type of roles for the most part. Developer evangelist was a little different but you know who the developers are? They're not paying customers. They're almost never the paying customer at the time, and especially so it wasn't a customer facing role in that sense.
Yeah.
They weren't the ones that were sending data to Splunk. There's definitely some use cases, and we can talk about that another time, like where, hey, makes sense to send my Jenkins or my Puppet logs, into Splunk, and there's some cool stuff you can do there, or my, but now it's like, hey, everything is, developers are more when you have DevOps, all these things are all tied together. So the operations of the thing used to be separate. Now it's
Right.
separate. So the orchestration of how the code got into the container might come before, and then the code's in the container running the container. Now the logs are coming out of the container. Splunk needs to have the logs come out of the container. That's a no-brainer. People have been doing that for a long time. But what about that process that led up to that? Isn't that relevant? So that's where I do like to get involved in those kind of conversations, which are pretty interesting.
So you've been here now 7
mm-hmm.
7 years. And I think one of the biggest takeaways I got from what you shared is that when we go all the way back to the start of your career, and you were talking about being in the lab, in the security lab,
I have to text my boss and tell him I'm recording a podcast. Right?
I said, you said iOS, I said OS2. Mm-hmm. I can't think of a better generational divide than than us pointing out some people who are very familiar with iOS will have no idea what OS2 is. And those people that know what OS2 is are going to be like, yeah, but what about OS2 Warp? So
yeah,
I just wanted to comically pay homage to them.
Back in the day, I had DOS, 3.3, and I had DeskView 386, like I'm old in the computer sense.
Yeah.
But
so
I lived to 150 though, so I'm not really that old in the scheme of
how biblical.
Yeah. I don't know.
So we now know a bit about each other. One thing I wanted to do was, I guess, get a sense from you, like, where do you see us going with SplunkTalk?
So how long we got? I mean, because we've been going for, 30 minutes or something?
Yeah, we should wrap up.
Yeah, so maybe we save that for episode 2.
Ooh.
What do you think?
Episode 2.
So there will be an episode 2. And episode 2 can be, here's what we think we're going to do, and then we'll be asking for feedback, because we don't exist in a vacuum, and maybe people have ideas of what they would like to hear.
So with that in mind,
have a closing that we would mention things like, there is a SplunkTalk podcast. We're in, we have a Twitter handle. It's called SplunkTalk. We have, what else do we have? There actually is a Facebook page too. I don't know what else we have. But
we have a tag on answers, but we have to figure out how we want to use that.
Yes. There's also Reddit. I'm on Reddit. R Splunk. Slack. Oh, yes. So how do you tell people about the Splunk user groups Slack team? Like, how do you get them started? Because there's that page on Docs. Are you familiar with that page on Docs?
Yeah, I think I referenced that, but for the sake of this podcast,
but audibly, verbally, how do we share that with people?
Yeah, I would say check the show notes.
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Good deal. If you do just happen to not check the show notes and you're just listening though, and you think about it, if you just Google Splunk Slack, then for me, it's the second link right now. Chat groups is the name of the page on the Splunk documentation website. And there are links to there on how to get started and what that's all about, and how to get an account and all that.
And we have a room in there. We would call the channel in Slack terminology.
hashtag SplunkTalk.
So you can engage with us there.
Touch with us one-on-one. And we will be in the future live streaming in that and be participating in that chat room interactively with people. We're just not there yet on the infrastructure side, so give us a little bit.
As noted by the fact that I've got the Bluetooth headpiece.
No, I mean, it works. It works. And
so
the you cleaned up. I see your office is looking nice and snappy.
Yes. I did deliberately leave all my Nerf guns out just as a teaser.
Where did you spend like several minutes just kind of like, let's shift it this way, by 3 degrees?
No, I wouldn't do that. But I think
do a thing. I just turned on. Behind me.
I think you've got a good point. We can, we've got ways that we want to engage with people. This is our first time, but looking forward to the future episodes. And we've got some cool segment ideas, guests that we want to bring in. So this should be really exciting and really fun.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. And I hope you have an excellent weekend, Birch. That was
as they say in the Truman Show. If I don't see you later, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.
You know what? Before we close, I have a Truman Show story.
Ooh.
One of my good friends, many years ago, when his brother-in-law lived in New York, he was a playwright. He probably still is in New York and a playwright. But I'm speaking about the past here. So this playwright, he was shopping a play around, and it was called Frank's Life, I think was the name of it. And he shopped it around, and I don't know what he may have done wrong as far as best practices in the industry. Maybe didn't get a document signed that he should have gotten. It was the Truman Show. He sued them, and he was able to document, I forget the number, it's been a long time, 302 similarities or whatever, a ridiculously long example of, hey, all they did was change the names here and there, whatever, and prove that it was his story. Now, this was not a public settlement. There's no, it was a civil suit, whatever. There's no public records or whatever. But I heard he did pretty well. So that's my Truman Show story.
Wow.
Always get those NDAs signed, kids.
Yeah, always get those. So that's the moral of today's episode. Get those NDAs signed. We'll have to come up with a fun, consistent closing, but I'll do a spin move just like we opened it. This has been SplunkTalk.
Yeah, we'll work on that. Okay. Yeah, we'll work on that.
Okay. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.